The hall shimmered like a paradise built to torment me. Gold, marble, silk. Beautiful lies hiding the truth. That night, I was nothing but a trembling Omega watching my own heart be sentenced. I already knew the King's Luna would never be me. But knowing didn't soften the pain. Knowing didn't stop the ruin. My love for him burned like a fever I tried to hide behind lowered lashes and quiet breaths. Yet it devoured me completely. And there, waiting for him to bind himself to another, I felt my soul tear apart. When he stepped forward, the hall fell silent. My pulse didn't. It screamed. I couldn't bear to watch his destiny written without me. I couldn't bear to let him see the moment I shattered. I bolted, desperate. I thought only of running, of getting as far away as my shaking body could take me. But fate willed that I stumbled, and the crystal goblets shattered with a sound as sharp as my own breaking heart. Gasps rose, heads turned, and his eyes, gods. His eyes found me instantly, intense, burning, unforgiving. Shame clawed at my throat. Agony coiled between my ribs. I ran before I could collapse entirely, plunging into the dark, icy forest, begging the wild to swallow the pieces of me that still whispered his name. The air in the sovereign's hearth was thick, almost viscous, heavy with the scents of polished stone, exotic spices, and the restless power radiating from the hundreds of high-ranking wolves assembled. This grand hall, the locus of pack power and tradition, was arrayed in a terrifying, celebratory splendor. The massive chandeliers cast shimmering light across the highly polished floor, reflecting the faces of the most esteemed families gathered for the most critical moment of the reign of the Sterling dynasty. I, Audrey Merritt, 22 years old, stood near the back, an intentional shadow. My humble position as a quiet Omega was usually enough to guarantee invisibility, a role I desperately clung to. But today, even the back corner felt like center stage, a crucible under the heat of the imminent decision. My heart wasn't beating. It was convulsing, a trapped, terrified bird trying to shatter its own ribs. Every instinct screamed at me to flee, to escape the sight that was coming. The sight I knew would utterly annihilate the fragile hope I had nurtured for years. I loved him. Completely. Desperately. Elias Sterling, 35 years old, our Alpha King, was a figure of absolute, terrifying beauty. He was towering, his presence so deeply authoritative that the air around him seemed thinner. His jet-black hair was sleek, and his penetrating silver eyes, currently scanning the assembly with reserved gravity, could strip a soul bare. Today, he wore the Sovereign's cloak, a heavy, dark mantle symbolizing his supreme authority, and, more immediately, his commitment to the choice he was about to make. He was waiting. The moment for the formal selection of his Luna, the mate who would stand beside him, the claiming ceremony, was upon us. I watched him move toward the dais. My breath hitched. He was magnificent, untouchable. I was ordinary, a wisp of copper hair and expressive hazel eyes that dared to hold too much emotion. He would choose one of the sleek, confident betas, or perhaps one of the wealthy visiting Alpha's daughters. He would choose someone worthy of the Sterling line. He would not choose me. The realization didn't hit like a sudden blow. It was a slow, agonizing slide into cold water. I couldn't watch his eyes meet hers. I couldn't witness the spark of recognition, the quiet declaration of possession, the look that would confirm I had been foolish enough to waste my love on the sun itself. I loved him too much to watch him choose someone else at the mating ceremony. The ceremony paused. Elias Sterling stood poised, his lips just beginning to part, preparing to utter the name that would change history and destroy me. The air was silent, thick with anticipation. This was my moment. If I was going to break, I needed to break in private. I edged sideways, attempting to slip unnoticed behind a massive decorative screen. I moved with the clumsy haste of someone trying to be stealthy while blinded by tears, my slight build feeling suddenly cumbersome and huge. My shoulder scraped the corner of a nearby serving station. It wasn't a whisper. It was a detonation. A stack of ceremonial obsidian-rimmed goblets, vessels meant for the celebratory toast, teetered, then crashed down onto the highly polished stone floor of the sovereign's hearth. The sound was deafening, a cascade of sharp, echoing crystal shattering the sacred silence of the claiming. The entire hall froze. Every head snapped toward the noise. A wave of horrified, scandalized silence washed over me. I was pinned by hundreds of stares, but only one mattered. Elias Sterling, who had been seconds away from speaking, turned his head slowly. His silver gaze, usually reserved and guarded, pierced me with an intensity that seemed to recognize my soul. In that instant, exposed and humiliated, I saw not anger, but something else. A flicker of recognition, perhaps confusion, buried beneath his powerful authority. It was too much. The shame, the pain, the knowledge that I had ruined the sanctity of his most important moment. It drove every last coherent thought from my mind. Humiliation overriding all reason. I didn't wait for punishment or pity. I didn't wait for the guards to approach. I ran. I bolted, a panicked animal, pushing past the appalled onlookers. I heard murmurs, sharp intakes of breath, perhaps even the call of my name, but they were distant, muffled by the roaring desperation in my ears. I burst through the massive double doors and didn't stop until the manicured palace grounds gave way to the deep, oppressive sanctuary of the Whispering Verge. The forest was dense, dark, and ancient, offering immediate concealment. I didn't follow a path. I simply plunged deeper into the wilderness, driven by the need for distance, for darkness, for oblivion. My lungs burned, my legs screamed, and the delicate fabric of my ceremony dress snagged and tore on thorny branches. I ran until the sheer physical exhaustion overcame me, running until my body failed to support the weight of my grief. I collapsed in a weeping, fearful heap amongst the thick, damp roots of an enormous oak. I curled into a ball, burying my face in my knees, allowing the tidal wave of shame and heartbreak to finally consume me. I had ruined everything. I would be exiled, punished, stripped of my rank. And for what? For the selfish, secret sin of loving my king too deeply to witness his happiness with another. I shook with silent sobs, the fear of Elias Sterling's deserved wrath overshadowing even the ache of my broken heart. I didn't hear him arrive. He was the Alpha King. Sound was a concession he did not have to make. The air around me suddenly shifted, becoming warmer, heavier, saturated with his unique, overpowering scent, pine, rain, and sheer power. I flinched, drawing my knees tighter to my chest, convinced the end had come. I didn't dare look up. A shadow fell over me. I waited for the stern voice, the command to return, the sharp reprimand for my cowardice. Nothing came. Then, a presence near my face. I squeezed my expressive hazel eyes shut. A large, warm hand settled gently on the side of my head. His thumb, calloused from years of ruling and combat, brushed against my wet cheek. He wiped the tears away, not roughly, but with an unexpected, almost bewildering tenderness. I finally looked up, blinking through the residual sting of my tears. Elias Sterling knelt before me, the sovereign's cloak pooling around his powerful frame, looking entirely out of place in the tangle of the ancient woods. His silver eyes bore into mine, yet there was no fury, no judgment, only an intense, almost frightening concentration. He had tracked me easily, his authority effortlessly cutting through the dark concealment of the Whispering Verge. He didn't speak a single word. He didn't demand an explanation for my catastrophic flight. He simply held my gaze for a long, aching moment, a silent depth of understanding passing between us that I couldn't possibly comprehend. Then, with the same smooth, deliberate motion, he slipped his arm beneath my back and the other under my knees. He lifted me. I weighed nothing to him. I was held against the firm, warm expanse of his chest, the heavy scent of his authority engulfing me. I was draped across the powerful body of the man I loved, the king I had just publicly disgraced, and he was carrying me, not dragging me, but carrying me with a security I had never known. I should have fought, demanded to be put down, but I was too overwhelmed, too numb. I simply buried my face in the sovereign's cloak, allowing myself to be transported back into the light, back toward the judgment. The return trip was silent. We emerged from the shadows of the whispering verge and into the floodlit, stunned silence of the sovereign's hearth. The assembly, still frozen in the exact positions they had held when I ran, watched us approach. The shock was palpable, heavier than any proclamation. The eligible omegas and betas who had awaited the claiming were wide-eyed. Elias Sterling strode directly to the center of the hall, the exact spot where the shattered remnants of the obsidian-rimmed goblets still lay scattered. He did not look at his guards, his advisors, or his court. His attention was solely focused on the terrified, weeping Omega clutched in his arms. He gently, firmly, set me back on my feet, but kept one hand settled protectively, definitively, at the small of my back. The profound silence demanded a verbal explanation, a reason for his pursuit, for this bizarre, humiliating return. But the Alpha King offered none. Instead, Elias Sterling looked down at me, his silver eyes blazing with a depth of ownership and devotion that I had never dared to dream existed. It wasn't the reserved gaze of a king choosing a politically advantageous Luna. It was the intense, consuming fire of a true mate finding his other half. He raised his voice, a sound that resonated with the force of command and the depth of irreversible commitment. His eyes locked with mine, searing the words into my very soul. Before this entire court, he declared, his voice ringing across the hall, under the eyes of the Sterling dynasty, let it be known. He gently guided my chin up with his free hand, ensuring everyone saw the desperate, tear-stained face of the girl who had fled. I have made my choice. He didn't need to name the others he had considered. He didn't need to justify the spectacle or the shattered ceremony. He simply looked at me, his Luna, his mate, and claimed me with a ferocity that transcended all tradition. Audrey Merritt is mine. She is my queen, my Luna, forever. The name Audrey, the word Luna. The combination hit me with the physical force of a tidal wave. I registered nothing but the sound of his voice. Raw, absolute, staking a claim that negated every single humiliation, every secret tear, every fear I had ever harbored. I stood there, a mess of tear-streaked skin and torn fabric, the wreckage of the obsidian-rimmed goblets sparkling at my feet like bitter stars. My king, Elias, held my chin, forcing me to meet his stare, demanding that I accept the reality he had just forged. The silence that followed his declaration was not the shocked silence of the ceremony before the crash. It was a devastating, judgmental void. I could feel the gazes of the assembled court, sharp and hostile, drilling holes into my fragile body. I was an Omega, a runaway, a girl who had spoiled the most sacred event of the Sterling dynasty, and now I was being hoisted onto the throne. The women, the beautiful, poised candidates who had waited patiently, who had dressed impeccably, who possessed the proper lineage, their collective fury was a palpable heat that should have incinerated me on the spot. I saw the flash of hatred in their eyes, the instant dismissal of my worth, the certainty that Elias had made a catastrophic error born of momentary madness. Elias, however, remained utterly unconcerned with their opinions. His hand remained firmly settled at the small of my back, a solid anchor that radiated warmth, and more importantly, unwavering possession. It was a silent declaration to the entire court. This one is mine. Dispute it and face your king. He leaned down, his towering height forcing me to tilt my head back further. His silver eyes, usually cool and reserved, were molten. He didn't speak the words for the court's benefit anymore. This was for me. "You ran," he murmured, his voice a low, resonant rumble that only I could hear. The deep, authoritative presence that defined him was focused entirely on me. "You ran from me." My throat tightened. Shame flared hot again. I couldn't watch," I whispered, the words barely audible. "I loved you too much to watch you choose someone else." A strange, almost pained expression crossed his features, fleeting but profound. He straightened slowly, drawing me slightly closer until my copper hair brushed against the sovereign's cloak. He released my chin, turning his penetrating gaze slowly across the assembly. He didn't raise his voice, but the sudden, absolute silence that fell confirmed that every wolf in the hall was straining to hear his next breath. "There will be no further discussion regarding my choice," Elias stated, his tone devoid of compromise. "The ceremony is concluded. My Luna stands beside me. The council will prepare the formal documentation immediately. The transition begins now. The sheer audacity of his command, the refusal to offer any explanation for selecting an unknown Omega who had just disgraced the pack ritual, was breathtaking. He had shattered tradition, not by choosing me, but by refusing to acknowledge the chaos my flight had caused. He treated the shattered goblets, the terrified gasps, and the political implications as irrelevant dust beneath his feet. He didn't wait for applause or protest. With a definitive grip on my shoulder, Elias turned us sharply and began to walk. The court parted instantly, like water before a stone ship. I was swept along in his wake, moving through a sea of bewildered faces. I felt a wave of dizziness, the abrupt shift from utter despair in the dark isolation of the Whispering Verge to being visibly, irrevocably claimed by the most powerful alpha in the land was too much for my emotional system to process. We left the Sovereign's hearth, the silence of the massive hall replaced by the heavy thud of Elias' footsteps on the palace stone. He led me not to the Omega quarters, nor to a holding cell, but straight toward the private wing, the guarded, sacred domain of the Sterling Line. As we ascended the grand staircase, I finally found a shaky voice. "Elias," I started, my voice thin. "You can't. This isn't fair to you. Or to the pack. I ruined everything. I should be exiled, not." I gestured vaguely at the opulent corridor we were entering. He paused outside a massive carved door, the entrance to the royal chambers. He turned to face me fully, his shadow engulfing me in the soft torchlight. "You think I concern myself with what is fair?" he asked, his silver eyes flashing. "I am the king, Audrey. My choice is the law, and you did not ruin anything. You simply expedited a decision that had been pending for far too long." My hazel eyes widened in confusion. "Pending? You didn't even know who I was, Elias. I was a ghost in this hall, just a quiet servant." He lifted his hand, cupping my cheek again, his touch impossibly tender compared to the overwhelming power of his presence. "Every time I entered the Sovereign's hearth, I felt your eyes on me, Audrey," he revealed, his voice dropping to a near whisper, a secret shared only between us and the heavy oak door. "Do you think an alpha of my rank, a king who feels the shifting intentions of hundreds of wolves around him, would be unaware of the one constant, silent devotion focused solely on him?" I gasped, utterly stunned. "He knew? You were a shadow." "Yes," he continued, brushing a stray lock of copper hair from my face. "But your love was not. It was a relentless, silent beacon. It demanded my attention precisely because it asked for nothing in return. But the ceremony," I stammered. "You were seconds away from choosing someone else." He shook his head, a decisive, powerful movement. "I was seconds away from naming a Luna based on political necessity and stability, a choice guided by logic, not instinct. My mind was settled, but my soul was restless. And then, you shattered the silence. You ran." He paused, a flicker of something raw entering his gaze. "When you broke those goblets, Audrey, I didn't see a clumsy servant. I saw fear, raw and total, mirrored in your eyes. I saw your desperate need to escape the pain of my selection. In that instant, I understood that your quiet love was not simply devotion, it was consuming. And my wolf," he lowered his voice, the sound husky and possessive, "my wolf roared for the first time in months. It saw your desperation, your flight from heartbreak, and recognized its own truth." He leaned closer, his scent intensifying, wrapping around me like a promise and a threat. The choice was no longer logical. It became imperative. "When you chose to flee into the Whispering Verge, you revealed the depth of your passion. And when I followed you into the dark and saw you curled up, terrified and weeping, I realized that I loved the intensity of the love you hid, and I found I couldn't bear to let it run from me." He tightened his grip on my waist, pulling me fully against the solid plane of his body. The Sovereign's cloak felt heavy and real beneath my fingers. "You ran because you loved me too much to see me choose another. I pursued you because in that moment of your flight, I realized I couldn't choose anyone else but you." He nudged the door open with his foot, ushering us into the lavish, dimly lit chamber. It was a space of enormous power and comfort, utterly private. "The political noise will settle," Elias stated, guiding me toward a plush seating area. "The jealousy will fade. My choice is final." He removed the sovereign's cloak, laying it across a velvet chaise lounge, suddenly transforming from the distant Alpha King into just Elias, towering and imposing, but present. He knelt again before me, taking my torn, trembling hands in his. "I may not have known your name as intimately as I knew your devotion, but I tracked you with the instinct of a true mate. That connection, made in the despair of the forest, is stronger than any ceremony we could have planned." He raised my hands, turning them over and placing a slow, gentle kiss on each of my palms. "You are mine, Audrey, no longer in the shadows. We will deal with the logistics and the backlash tomorrow. Tonight, you are home." He released my hands only to slide his arms around my waist, lifting me off the ground and settling me securely in his lap on the chaise lounge. I was still shaking, but the trembling was now born of release, not fear. I wrapped my arms around his neck, finally allowing myself to lean into the undeniable reality of his claim. I buried my face in his strong neck, inhaling the calming scent of his authority, letting the overwhelming magnitude of the day fade. The fear, the humiliation, the heartbreak, it all melted away under the undeniable, fierce possessiveness of the king who had broken all rules for the quiet Omega who ran. I had run as far as I could, only to find that the distance had simply served as the final, necessary catalyst to bring me exactly where I belonged, in his arms. He was my king, and I was his Luna. The reign of the Sterling dynasty would continue, but now it would continue with me, the girl who loved him too much to stay. And as Elias tightened his hold, a soft, satisfied growl rumbling deep in his chest, I knew there would be no more running. This was forever. The silence of the chamber swallowed the ghosts of the crashed goblets and the shocked gasps of the court. Here, in the heart of the Sterling dynasty, the air was warm, rich with the cedar and leather of old wealth, and overlaid heavily with the intensely masculine, calming scent of Elias. It was a physical sanctuary, but my heart hammered a frantic rhythm against the silk of his ceremonial tunic. I slowly lifted my head from his shoulder, the copper strands of my hair catching on the fine fabric. My eyes, still stinging with the residual burn of tears, met his. The silver of his gaze was no longer just authoritative. It held a molten heat, an absolute certainty that defied logic and shattered every expectation I had ever held for my life. "You do not tremble out of fear now, little one," Elias observed, his thumb tracing the curve of my waist. His voice was husky, weighted with the raw emotional drain of the ceremony and the chase. I don't know what I'm feeling," I admitted, the truth thick and shaky. "It is too much, too sudden. I was running to escape being forgotten, and instead, I have become impossible to ignore." I pulled back just enough to look at the room, this sacred space of which I had only heard whispered rumors. It felt wrong. I was supposed to be folding linens or scrubbing floors, not sitting on the lap of the Alpha King in his private quarters, wrapped in the protective cloud of his overwhelming presence. "Elias, please," I pleaded, my anxiety returning in a fresh wave. "The pack, the council, they will believe this is coercion, that you chose me out of pity for the girl who disgraced the ceremony. They will demand proof of connection, of lineage." He shifted slightly, settling me more firmly against him, an action that radiated ownership. "And what do you think they will receive, Audrey? Pity? You misunderstand the dynamics of power. The pack requires a stable Luna, yes, but they require a king who is resolute even more. I showed them my resolve today. Any wolf who doubts my judgment is doubting the strength of the Sterling dynasty itself, and they will learn quickly that my judgment is sound." He didn't wait for my response, instead gently tucking a hand beneath my chin, forcing my gaze to hold his. "You need to understand something crucial, Audrey. Before today, I knew of your love. I knew you watched, but I kept you in the periphery, prioritizing the logical choice, the political expedient choice. My wolf was quiet, resigned to obligation. He accepted the duty to the pack. He leaned in, his mouth close to my ear, his breath warm against my skin. But when you ran, when you fled into the whispering verge out of sheer, unadulterated heartbreak, something fractured inside me. It wasn't pity that pulled me after you. It was pure, instinctual rage. Rage that you thought so little of yourself, that you believed I could choose anyone else once your true feelings were laid bare. His words, intense and possessive, felt less like a confession and more like an imposition of absolute truth. When I wiped the tears from your cheek, he continued, his voice dropping lower, vibrating with deep intensity, I felt the true, undeniable snap of our bond. That moment, in the dark, cold forest, was our true mating ceremony, Audrey. Not the grand, empty spectacle in the hall, but the private, desperate recognition of two souls tied by devotion and destiny. My breathing hitched. I had been so consumed by terror and shame that I hadn't registered the shift in his presence, only the overwhelming relief of his arrival. You tracked me by scent, I whispered, realizing the depth of his action. Tracking an Omega during a formal ceremony, ignoring the hundreds of high-ranking guests, that wasn't kingly duty. That was sheer, untamed instinct. I did, he confirmed simply. And that scent, Audrey, was amplified by the desperation of your flight. It called to me, bypassing all the political noise, all the logic. I am Elias, king of this domain, but I am also Alpha, and my Alpha recognized its mate running into danger, believing itself unworthy. He lifted his hand and pressed it flat against the center of my chest, directly over my racing heart. Stop running, Audrey. Internally or externally, the chase is over. You are claimed. You have broken the tradition. Yes, but only because tradition was fundamentally flawed, attempting to ignore a connection that was destined to surface. I choose the girl who loves me fiercely enough to run from me, over any polished, politically perfect woman who simply waited for the crown. The weight of his words finally began to settle the internal turmoil. I was not an accident. I was an imperative. The realization was liberating, yet terrifying. I found the courage to ask the question that had plagued me since my flight. But the women, the candidates, they are all of high standing. What will you tell them? What will they do? Elias allowed a rare, chilling smile to touch his lips, a look of profound, cold dominance that reminded me exactly who he was. They will disperse. They are aware of the customs. The king has chosen. Their fury is irrelevant. They came for power, status, and the crown. They did not come for me. You, however, came for nothing but the silent joy of watching me rule. You ran to protect your own heart from the pain of rejection. That depth of pure, self-sacrificing emotion is what the Sterling line requires in its Luna. Passion, not calculation. He shifted his grasp, tilting my face toward him again. His expression softened, melting the cold Alpha into the tender mate I was just beginning to realize existed. We need to begin the grounding process, Elias stated, his voice now lower, filled with ancient purpose. Today's upheaval was violent, necessary, but volatile. We need to solidify the reality of the bond, for both our sakes. You need to stop seeing yourself as the frightened Omega who spilled the wine, and start seeing yourself as the Luna who broke my centuries-old resolve. He stood smoothly, lifting me with him. I was still encased securely in his arms, pressed against the warmth of his powerful chest. The king's chambers are your home now, Audrey. The transition begins tonight. We will not wait for formal ceremony, nor for the council's blessing. We will solidify what the forest revealed. He walked the few steps toward the enormous, plush bed situated beneath a vaulted ceiling. He placed me gently upon the silk coverlet, his silver eyes never leaving mine. As he moved, I noticed the lingering tension in his shoulders, the exhaustion of maintaining the rigid control required to carry off such a shocking public act. He was not just the king. He was a wolf who had been starved of his mate and had been forced to tear down his own walls in a moment of crisis. Elias knelt beside the bed, his dark hair falling forward slightly as he gazed at me. He took my hands again, anchoring me. I gave you my word in the hall, but words are fleeting. I need you to feel the truth of this bond, deep in your soul, so you never again doubt your place by my side. This was the climax, not of violence or drama, but the absolute defining moment of acceptance and commitment that sealed the transition from terrified runaway to sacred Luna. He didn't speak the word mate again. He didn't need to. Instead, he simply leaned down, closing the small gap between us. His kiss was not demanding or aggressive, but a deep, careful affirmation. It was a merging of spirit, a slow, patient declaration of ownership that bypassed fear and settled deep into the marrow of my bones. In that kiss, I felt the reverberations of his authority, the weight of the crown, and the startling tenderness of his devotion. It was the taste of ancient forests and absolute power, filtered through a newfound, overwhelming love. The moment he pulled away, I was breathless, my hands clutching the sovereign's cloak that lay nearby on the chaise lounge, seeking familiar grounding. But I didn't need the cloak. I had him. "I love you, Elias," I confessed, the words finally free, unbound by the necessity of silence. "I have always loved you. I just never thought—" "Stop thinking," he commanded softly, his hand settling on the side of my neck, his thumb stroking my pulse point. "Start feeling. Your worth is not determined by your lineage, but by your presence beside me. That quiet, hidden devotion was the only thing that kept me sane through years of political isolation. It was always meant to be you." He shifted onto the bed beside me, not moving to take advantage of the situation, but simply to hold me, chest to chest, his powerful arms wrapped around me, a fortress built of muscle and love. The king was finally resting, his chosen Luna secured against him. I closed my eyes, inhaling the comforting, deep scent of my alpha. The overwhelming chaos of the day, the terrifying flight into the whispering verge, the shattering of the goblets, it all receded into a distant memory, a necessary dramatic prelude to this quiet, undeniable conclusion. I had run as far as I could go, but distance, I realized now, was irrelevant. The true journey had not been across the palace grounds, but the short, terrifying trip from the shadows of my fear to the light of his certainty. And here, cradled against the king who loved the depth of the love I hid, I finally understood that I had stopped running forever. The Sterling dynasty had its Luna, and I had my mate. There was nowhere else to go. Smash that like, then snag that sub,